Checkmate themes are essential to memorize if you want to master your finishing technique in attacks. In part 1, we will be viewing the first 18 most important checkmate themes, and then in the next video, which will be part 2, we will view the last 18. In this video, we'll be viewing them in alphabetical order. So the checkmate themes that start with A will be the first. Let's dive right in. So coming up on the screen is the first checkmate theme, which is Anastasia's mate. This occurs when the knight, we play knight e7, king h8, queen into h7 check, king h7, rook h4 mate. So as you can see, the king is boxed in by his own pawn and the knight controlling these two squares, while the rook gives the finishing checkmate. So this kind of mate is known as Anastasia's mate. The second checkmate theme is known as Anderson's mate, and it happens when you use the pawn to support the rook giving checkmate and your friendly king is supporting the pawn, like rook a8 checkmate is an example of the Anderson checkmate. Number 3 is Arabian mate, where the knight and rook work together to suffocate the enemy king and the rook delivers the checkmate with the help of the knight, which is controlling these two squares, and the rook controls this square. So the king is now checkmated. The fourth one is back rank mate, and this is probably one of the most common ones, wherein the king getting checkmated is boxed in by his own pawns, and all we have to do is deliver a check, which will therefore mate the king. The fifth theme is Balestra mate, and this theme is not very commonly known by its name, but it is quite common in application. So we play bishop d6, which is a checkmate, and as you can see, the bishop and queen are working together. The queen kind of creates a box around the king, which does not let it escape, and the bishop controls this e7 square and also delivers the checkmate. Number 6 is Blackburn's mate, which usually involves the sacrificing of your queen like this. So there are too many checkmate threats, that is why black will have to capture the queen, and now bishop h7 is a checkmate. So we are using this bishop to control these two squares in front of the enemy king, and the bishop gives the check with the support of the knight. So this is known as the Blackburn's mate. Number 7 is the blind swine mate, which happens when two rooks are on the 7th rank. The black king is blocked in by his own rook, which is in a castled position, and white can simply play this rook a g7 checkmate. This rook covers this file, this rook covers this file and this square, and black's own rook is suffocating him, thus leading to a check and mate. This is called a blind swine mate. Number 8 is Boden's mate, and it involves the using of two bishops to checkmate the enemy king. So you can see one bishop cuts off these two squares, the other bishop delivers the check and controls this square, while black's own pieces suffocate him on the last two squares, leading to a checkmate. So this is called the Boden's mate. Number 9 is corner mate, where the king is boxed in by his own pawn and the rook cuts off the king from coming out here, so we can just deliver a checkmate with the knight. So this kind of checkmate is called a corner mate. Then there is a corridor mate, which occurs on any file, rank or diagonal. It happens when the king is completely boxed in either by our own pieces or by his own pieces on a file, rank or a diagonal, and we just have to give the check on the file, rank or diagonal which is standing. So in this case, you can see the rook controls this rank, this rook controls this rank, so the king can't escape anywhere to these squares, and he's boxed in by his own rook, of course. And then we can play queen h7 checkmate. So the king is completely covered on all three ranks. This can also occur for diagonals or files. The point is it has to be completely boxed in. So this kind of a checkmate will be called the corridor mate. Number 11 is the Kozio's mate, also known as dovetail mate, due to arrangement of the pieces in the final checkmate after queen h3 checkmate. So the queen gives the check and controls these important squares, while black's own pieces are obstructing him from escaping to these two squares. And obviously the queen is supported by some friendly piece like our king. So this is called Kozio's mate. Then the next checkmate we have is Damiano's mate, wherein we want to get our queen onto the h file and checkmate the king, but we can't do so in tempo. That is why we sacrifice the rook. The king has to take, and now we give a check. The king moves, and queen h7 is a checkmate. So this kind of a checkmate. This can also involve the sacrificing of more pieces on the file, but the point is in the end the queen comes and delivers the checkmate. So it's basically clearing the way for the queen, and this is called the Damiano mate. Then there is the David and Goliath mate. So as a lot of people know from the Bible, David is a boy who conquers a giant whose name is Goliath. So in this case, it represents a pawn giving checkmate to the king, pawn being the most inferior piece and the king being the most valuable. So do not underestimate the pawn's ability to checkmate a king. So this kind of a checkmate where a pawn is checkmating the king is known as David and Goliath mate. Then there is the epaulette mate, named after the decorative shoulder pieces of the people in armies. And after queen g6, the king cannot move to these three squares because of our king, and his own rooks decorate his shoulders like epaulettes, and this leads to his demise. So this kind of a checkmate is known as epaulette checkmate. Number 15 is fool's mate, which is the shortest possible checkmate in chess from the opening. It can happen after either f3 or f4, e5, g4 and queen h4 mate. So you can see the king is checkmated. He cannot put anything in between and he has nowhere to escape to. This kind of a checkmate is known as fool's mate. It can also occur after the first move f4. Then there is Greco's mate, which occurs when the king is boxed in by his own pawn, and the bishop covers one essential square for the king to escape, and the rook delivers the final checkmate. So this is known as Greco's checkmate. The h file mate. So this is a kind of checkmate which occurs on the h file. So here we play rook into g6 to open the h file. Since this bishop is covering this square and the knight is pinned, black will have to take, and now after rook h8 it's a checkmate because this knight is pinned. So basically any checkmate that happens with the help of the bishop supporting the rook on the h file is known as the h file checkmate. And the final checkmate theme for this video is the hook mate, which occurs after rook h8 checkmate. So you can see how the knight is kind of supporting the rook like a hook, and the king is getting checkmated. So the knight has to be supported by a pawn, which can also be here or any other piece, and the knight supports the rook, which delivers the final checkmate. Note how important this pawn obstructing the king is. Well, that's it for part 1. We will look at the remaining 18 themes in the next video. Bye.